UPS evaluated when it decided to pick this competitive wholesale program? Did you look at the minimum bill? Did you look at, I mean, obviously you did look at fixed charges. What else was on the table, and how do you evaluate all of those things, and what's best for you and potentially the path of least resistance in getting what you want?
We haven't looked at minimum bill yet, and we're really open. I mean, I think everybody understands that there's no one and done, right, as the market continues to change. And so if our pilot works and we can do 50 megawatts of this PPA, we're 3 years down the road, and then it's something different. So we're really open. We did look at fees. It was practically a non-starter. We did a value of solar, and it was much lower, really, than surprise, than what the solar community thought it should be. And at that point, too, we tried to get in a room, and the two sides just couldn't get close enough on that, and we abandoned it, basically. So we haven't looked at minimum bill yet. We do have Solar San Antonio is definitely interested in that, so that's something that we're willing to look at. We're really willing to look at anything, and we'll come to the table to talk about, again, sort of how we can meet our needs in the solar community and expand solar. Like we support it. We're not trying to kill it. We for as small of amount of solar as we have, we lead the state of Texas. I mean, we even have more solar than Austin. But it's got to be sustainable. We don't have shareholders to answer to. We have to answer, though, to the community, and our city council has to approve everything. And so we're open.
Yeah. What is the penetration of solar in San Antonio there?
The penetration. So.
And are you seeing revenue impacts currently because of solar development, or is this sort of a premature decision?
It's very small. I mean, what we're seeing is the growth rate, right? We have, I think, 20 megawatts of rooftop solar, but what we've seen is about 400% increase in the last 3 years. So what I think our leadership was looking at was the growth rate and saying this isn't sustainable. We also have a very robust energy efficiency program that is also going to affect our fixed costs. And so again, it becomes a much bigger question of solar or net metering, and it becomes rate structure. And so I think we've got pretty visionary leadership in Doyle Beneby, and he's willing to be open, but it's a process, right? And what I think Julia was saying is earlier, or maybe it was Jim, we can't move terribly quickly. And so that's one of the reasons we're piloting, right, this PPA idea, is because we're spending community money, and we can't be bleeding edge. Maybe some investor-owned utilities can be. But that said, we can perhaps do more than a utility that's beholden to shareholders.
Owen, you worked at Duke for 11 years, right? Yeah. So what is your perception of how a utility like Duke views these changes to rate design, views net metering, and sees the distributed world approaching?
So good question. I think, in my view, I think the solution set that many utilities are thinking about is, honestly, I think it's governed by what they understand is practical in the eyes of regulators and other stakeholders. And so many of the solutions that, for example, that we put forward in our ELAB work call for a paradigm shift in the utility-customer relationship. We've charged for electricity in the same way for a long, long time. And I think that many utilities and many regulators, frankly, think that these are too hard to change and that customers will never understand them, and that it will create a lot of backlash if we go from a flat rate structure to demand charges or time-varying rates and things of that sort. But the evidence points to a different story, where early examples do show that customers understand these rate structures and these more sophisticated rate structures and can save money under those. So I think one of the biggest opportunities that we have really is to push that discussion further, to explore these paradigms that have been held so deeply, and really understand, by looking into some of these successful examples that have been created so far, what are the customer impacts, and how can we go even further than a simple time of use rate structure to something even approaching a real-time pricing spectrum, for instance, that can unleash a lot of innovation from solution providers that have technology capabilities that can enable customers to save money and keep it very simple still, even though the rate structure could become much more sophisticated than what we've been accustomed to.
Brian, what is Task's philosophy on how the solar industry should approach these battles and negotiate? And I think that the perception is that Task is very black and white, really wants to negotiate from the hard left, and is not necessarily receptive to utility concerns about lost revenue, about their fixed costs, et cetera. How do you think, first of all, is that perception legitimate? And secondly, how do you think the solar industry should approach this? What's your philosophy?
Well, the perception that Task is a tough, aggressive advocate that is vocal for the rooftop solar industry is absolutely true, and we're proud of that. The perception that we do not negotiate is just false, and the facts don't bear that out. And I'll just give you the examples. The only comprehensive common ground that's actually been found on this issue this year between utilities and the rooftop solar industry was between Task and National Grid in Massachusetts, based around the concept of a minimum bill. And the CEO of my company, Lynn Jurich, published a joint op-ed in the Boston Globe with Marcy Reed, the CEO of one of the largest utilities in the world, laying out a pretty remarkable document on two powerful CEOs who don't typically align on issues like this coming together, and that ultimately led to the minimum bill issue in Massachusetts. So actually, every deal that's been cut to resolve one of these, Task has been the chief negotiator in it. We are always open to negotiating. We always prefer to negotiate. But when the utilities insist on eliminating solar, and we have zero-sum games where the option on the table is we will not agree to anything, this is the utility speaking, unless it eliminates rooftop solar in the market, we will not cut that deal. We will fight, and we will fight as hard as we possibly can. We think we owe that to the rest of the industry, and we certainly owe it to the many partners that Sunrun has and the other members of Task.
I'd like to open it up for some questions, if anyone has any for the panel. Yes, Pamela. Do we have a microphone going around? Yeah. You're
Hi.
on.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
We heard you before a little bit.
Well, I just give my question very loudly. So, net energy metering has pretty much been the underpinning of value of solar pretty much since I started the industry over a decade ago. I really think what got us here probably won't get us there, meaning the massive growth that we'll likely go through in the next maybe decade plus. A lot of these models, these new models we've been talking about, are great. I'd really like to hear, especially from Brian on this, do you see that we could get to a point where we don't necessarily need net energy metering, and that's actually a market constraint that we're putting on us to getting more solar out there?
And then as a separate question, I'll ask you about your opinion on value of solar.
Yeah, I think we have a tendency in the solar industry to imagine a world that doesn't exist. The utilities always want to bait us into this debate where we say, let's imagine everybody had rooftop solar and everybody cut the cord and everybody left the grid. What we do? And so let's solve that problem now instead of dealing with the facts in front of us. And so I really hesitate to use the crystal ball too much, because I've always been surprised by what technology brings and what consumer adoption brings. I think Owen made some great points about how sophisticated customers prove to be when you give them new options. And when I try to look, 10, 15, 20 years from now down the road, boy, I don't know what storage is going to bring. I don't know what the price of batteries is going to bring. I don't know how much TOU we're going to have, and I don't know what on-site demand management is going to look at. What we try to do instead is we try to use real academic studies to look at the things that we can actually see, typically in the 5-year window. And that's what the net metering cost benefit studies typically do, is they'll look at procurement plans that are on the table where we've got to make decisions right now. And we see as much as we can, and we try to be real that we know we're going to be surprised. And so I just don't know what the future is going to bring. If somebody would have told me what panel prices are today a few years ago, I would have said you were insane. And I hope that we've got those pleasant surprises going forward. But as to net energy metering, I do think it's the fundamental policy. I do think that this is the most important policy. It's really the most universal energy policy anywhere in the country. When you have a fragmented regulatory system like we have, and you see 43 states doing the same thing, that's pretty remarkable. And I'd point out about net energy metering, the only federal law we have on NEM was part of the George Bush energy bill. This historically was certainly never a partisan issue. It had wide support, and that was from the bill that's often referred to as EPACT 05, and that led to a broad adoption of NEM throughout the country. I just want to point out some of the few remaining states that don't have it are actually moving in the direction to adopt it. We're not contracting it, we're moving forward. The most interesting one to me is Mississippi, which is the second most conservative state in the country. It just concluded a net metering cost benefit study and found that rooftop solar provides a net benefit to all ratepayers, actually puts downward pressure on utility rates. And I can assure you that study was not underpinned by tree-hugging liberalism. It was a very conservative effort to find a different result, and they came to the same conclusion that we did. So net metering's here to stay. It is the most important policy.
Does anyone else want to respond to that? Or
I'll just make a comment. I just think, one of our ELAB members, who I won't identify by specifically, but had laid out what I thought was an interesting and compelling viewpoint, and that was that there's a lot of ways to jumpstart industries, and I think what we're talking about. Well, where is the horizon here? Where new structures? I guess what is the lifespan of net metering, and is it too far to even deal with it now, or not? And this room might be a bit of an echo chamber where we're saying things that where we're believing in these things, and I guess there's a lot of ways that we could jumpstart the solar industry. Net metering is one. I think what we've seen, and this coming from RMI as an organization that really holds a position in the marketplace of seeking to be equally credible to the solar industry and to utilities and to multiple other parties, is that it's proven to be very difficult for utilities either with low penetrations or high penetrations to deal with these issues, right? I mean, there's been a lot of divisiveness, a lot of uncertainty with regards to the true costs and benefits. I certainly don't have all the answers, and there's a lot of different studies that have demonstrated different value for solar to the grid under different structures. I guess my point simply is that it's it's proven to be very challenging to modify what's been started with net metering, but I think we are recognizing that in some places in the country, it's becoming a real set of issues, and we will increasingly have to grapple with these issues between utilities and the solar industry.
any other questions out there?
I actually have a question for Brian. In a way, net metering seems a little bit like a blunt instrument, and when we're talking about changing rate structure and doing stuff that, tiered pricing and pricing that sends signals, do you see net metering sort of also becoming more granular in that, when power is more, scarce, price goes up, and when it's not, so that it sort of reflects rates?
Well, that's what rate reform is for. I think that's the point Owen and I are trying to make. I won't speak for Owen, but you had a good description. Net metering is a billing mechanism that sits on top of a rate structure, and it's the rates. If my position is, task position is, if utilities don't like the rates that they've set for dozens of years, great, let's reform rates. But net metering means one thing. It means retail rate net metering. It is what enables the customer experience to not have to predict how much power they're going to be exporting. It's what keeps us from having astronomical customer acquisition costs and impossible conversations around the kitchen table where we say, what time of the day do you leave, and where's that going to change when your kids go to school, and what about the next 3 people in your house, because that's what the data tells us about the lifetime of a solar system. So no, I think you reform rates. Net metering is not broken, and it doesn't need a solution.
We had a question over here. Yes, this gentleman.
I think this question is targeted towards Tracy. Crude oil's hit a 5-year low. Some of that's fracking. Natural gas has collapsed quite a bit. So my question is, I would kind of think that your variable costs are the inputs, whether it's crude oil or natural gas, as it relates to power production. So what amount of the utilities costs are infrastructure and literally power lines and those kind of things versus power generation? And so that's the question.
So this is part of the problem, right? The vast majority of our costs are fixed, and yet the fixed part of our bill is very small, and it hasn't gone up in 20 years, and raising it would reduce incentives for both energy efficiency for solar. It could be a burden on low-income customers. And I'll tell you, CPS, we've got a VP who will say to you, we could never build another central power plant. That would be just fine, because the value going forward is in the grid and in the network. And how can we, incorporate DG, and how can we bring value to customers who want these things, who want to plug in their car at night, and figure out how to manage the grid in a way that we can serve all of these customers. But it is a problem. Our legacy costs are high. And I don't know the answer. And I think if it was an easy answer, we wouldn't be here. So.
Yes, right here.
I think I don't need a mic. I can ask.
Well, we'd like to have it just for the webcast.
Sorry, my name is Navneet Trivedi, and I have worked with utilities for the last 20 years. So I'm hearing like some kind of a notion here that, one against the other, like we are saying the solar industry is utility, and then, we are thinking that utilities are against solar industry. I don't think like the utilities care that much, because working with utilities, because there are new technologies and years have come. My question to you, Brian, and is that what are you offering from solar industry to utilities? Like, they have genuine concerns, right? We want utilities to maintain reliability. We want them to keep the lights on. We want them to be supplier of last resort. All of these things we want as a consumer. I don't want to lose power. Mm-hmm. So what is the solar industry is willing to offer to utilities in their defense? Like, instead of saying that utilities are asking too much and we have to survive by net metering or anything else.
Well, I think I missed a leap in the question. We're not causing reliability problems on the grid. We're not offering the utility industry anything. We don't owe the utility industry any solution to a problem that doesn't exist. So I think we just, this is again what we tend to do. We tend to project to a problem that doesn't exist, and let's go solve a problem that doesn't exist. So let's talk about the example where we've got the highest solar penetration anywhere in the country by far, which is why.
But so sorry, the intent here is that we want to increase solar penetration. Yeah. And do you think that increasing solar penetration will not create any reliability issue in the grid?
Well, again, let's talk about facts. Let's talk about the state that is a decade at least ahead of the rest of the country. That's Hawaii. About 1 out of every 10 homes has rooftop solar. We've just gone through extensive testing with the utility where circuits have been tested at 1,000% of daily minimum load. And without getting too technical, that is orders of magnitude higher than anything that's ever been imagined. The utilities looked at that all, did the testing, came back and said, we're going to interconnect virtually all the systems that have been sitting in a queue for a while. So we just don't have the problems that we're trying to solve right now. And so I think it's a temptation, and I understand why it's there. We're thinkers, and we're the intellectual left, and I'm one of you. I'm proud to be it. But we hobble ourselves when we fall into the debate of, well, let's go and stop something because it might be a problem one day. I want to keep looking at it. We are all for open and transparent data. That's what the NEM studies are about, and that's what we just went through with HECO. But even there, where you've got a utility that is so far ahead of the rest of the country in terms of actual installed capacity, we're just not seeing those problems. If those problems come to pass, we will work on the solutions, and I think we're laying the groundwork for them with some of the things Owen talked about, more transparent pricing signals that send a demand signal response, minimum bills, that sort of thing. But in terms of the actual technical issues, we can't imagine solutions to problems that haven't materialized.
Yes, up here.
Hi, this question is for Tracy and for Owen and Brian. I'd love to hear your feedback on it as well. And this is, as you add DG to, if you're just talking about the distribution grid, and obviously microgrids and the network effect starts coming into play here, especially as you increase penetration. And this idea of, I think the divesting from the grid entirely is no solar company's position. Because that network effect really is important. But one of the things that DG Technologies, solar and others writ large enable is the size of the network in order to gain the network effect is much smaller. So from a smaller utility side, or you could tell me I'm completely wrong, what do you think, where is the limiter? So if I'm talking to a California, IOU that covers its entire huge transmission thing, is there a way to, I guess, divest from the T part of GTD? Is there a way to enable the network effect without the transmission scale? And how does that change the conversation with distributed solar companies?
Owen?
Well, I'm not. So I guess I'll make a comment, and then maybe you can clarify if I'm on the right track or not. But there are certainly distribution companies out there today that don't have the transmission system. But certainly, there's increasing focus on the distribution system, the value of that grid, as Tracy was saying, and the New York REV proceeding is a great example where the distribution system platform, how do you, what is the right entity and what are the right specific things that need to be done to enable a real market and an exchange of value and services between solution providers and customers on a distribution grid. And so, I don't know if I'm on your
You are. I think
thought.
what I'm asking is how big does that grid need to be in order to enable the network effect? Because I don't think it needs to be as big as, say, utility districts are now. Or does that make sense in terms of, if you're especially on the East Coast, if you're talking about reliability and this entire focus on microgrids and hardening, what is the new balance of the scale of the grid for that network effect versus with the add-in of all of this new technology, including solar DG, that you didn't normally have in the one-way generation, transmission, distribution network effect that was the scale of the last 100 so years?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I don't know how to answer it precisely, but certainly as the economics of central generation plants are challenged relative to the economics of distributed energy resources. The notion of bigger and bigger balancing areas or service territories and being able to drive investment in very large central station generation assets, that's all challenged, and really you're then looking at feeder scale, distribution network scale, but exactly how small that gets and does it really fit the description of what people typically think of as a microgrid. I don't know if we get to that kind of micro scale or not efficiently.
Then we get into a nitty-gritty discussion about demand charges and utility franchise rights and where a microgrid fits into the distribution network. So we only got a couple minutes left here. I want to hear from you all on what you think are the most important developments in this area that people should be keeping their eyes on, either in a specific state or utility territory, or a specific set of rate structure proposals that people should be keeping their eyes on. What do you think, Brian? Anything particularly interesting?
Yeah, well, I think it's really a widely spread set of issues for next year. I've gotten that question a lot today from reporters, actually, and unfortunately, I think the answer is a little complicated, which is different utilities are going to pursue different things in different regions of the country. And so, we expect to, we haven't talked much about utility guaranteed profits for rooftop solar, also known as rate basing. That's certainly an issue that's coming up next year. BOSTs, feed-in tariffs are certainly an issue. Taxation at the local and state level is certainly an issue. All these rate design changes. But I do think the theme next year in these discussions is going to be a broader suite of issues. And I've like my sincere hope is that we have a not net metering panel next year, and we start to, because I think that's where we're headed.
Excellent. How about you, Owen?
I'll just say, I think one of the most interesting things to keep an eye on is related to one of the questions in the crowdsourcing question session about what will utilities do, what will the role of utilities be in terms of seeking to own and participate in distributed generation. And honestly, I think that question, the answer to that question is very closely linked with this discussion we're having about the level of sophistication of rate structures. We've seen many utilities indicate that distributed resources can create challenges, or that utilities might be able to better site and manage the installation and operation of distributed resources. Frankly, I think that many of those issues can be addressed with better price signals that will motivate the market and motivate consumers and third-party solution providers to install distributed resource combinations in the places on the grid and in the right combinations to deliver value to the grid, as opposed to leaving rate structures unsophisticated and leaving utilities in a position of trying to find other ways to manage challenges, one of which might be to seek to control the market.
Tracy, what should people be watching for in CPS territory?
Well, what we're really looking at the new EPA regulations and sort of how solar can play a role there. I'm curious too, as sort of when the ITC expires, how is that going to affect us? And then for Texas, right, we have not had any state support. And so I don't know that this legislature is the legislature that will do it, but it's certainly something that we've really been pushing for a long time. So that's sort of what we're going to be looking for in Texas.
Excellent. Tracy Adele Hamilton, Owen Smith, and Brian Miller, thanks very much.